They left him for dead in the mud, armor dented, throat raw from smoke, his name spat out like refuse by the very men who'd sworn fealty. Years later, the rag he tied to a broken spear became a banner that made seasoned captains abandon fields and ministers rearrange alliances. This is not a simple tale of revenge. It's the slow, relentless unmaking and remaking of a man who learned how to turn shame into strategy and how a single symbol can rewrite the rules of power. They had called him brave enough when it suited the court, disposable when it did not. Aldrich had been a captain of middling rank, no great blood, no grand retinue, trusted with a flank at the siege of Kaelhaven until the wind changed, and the commanders did what commanders most fear. They chose safety over truth. In the smoke and trampling of that final assault, a commander with more lineage than sense pulled back the lines and left Aldrich's men to hold a breach they could not. When the brigade finally ran, Aldrich lay under broken planks and a ruined banner, thought a corpse, and the world moved on with the economy of someone closing a ledger. Survival was a slow, private work. He woke to the rasp of a widow's hand on his brow and the sour, sweet smell of nettle tea. She sewed his wounds. She fed him bread whose crust flaked like broken promises. In the months that followed, Aldrich learned the anatomy of disgrace, how rumors coagulate into evidence, how a ledger can be forged, how a single whispered accusation, unauthorized extraction, mutiny, can swallow years of service. The marshal who had sent the order never lost sleep. Someone had to, and Aldrich took the role. He did not ride out masked with vengeance the way bards write. Vengeance in life is clumsy. He watched. He listened to the men who drifted from battlefield to tavern, veterans whose pensions were late and whose oaths had been spent like coin. He sat in the smoky back rooms of inns and learned the names of men who had been squeezed, mid-level stewards, ferrymen, an indebted miller who had once supplied the siege engines. Slowly, the shards of a following accreted around him, not a mob, not yet, but a hesitant collection of those who had nothing left to lose and everything to remember. His banner began as an accident. The rag tied to a splintered spear was what remained of a nobleman's standard, a strip of white scorched at one edge, a stain of red that might have been rust or blood. Aldrich tied it because he had nothing else to tie. It was shame turned practical. But symbols are greedy things. Men who had watched friends trampled to keep a lord's honor saw something else, a flag that had endured. They braided their grievances into a story. The rag took on names it did not deserve. The wound, the pledge, the reckoning. When Aldrich led a night ambush to reclaim food seized from a flood-stricken village, the same rag fluttered at the spearheads, and the men who had taken bread for the court's armies fled at sight of it, as if seeing some moral accounting. Word spread like tinder. He learned to fight differently. Where nobles massed cavalry and sought headline battles, Aldrich used patience. The geography of marsh and hedgerow, the cruelty of knowing his enemy's calendar. He would strike the tax riders at dawn, free the shackled oxen by dusk, and leave no obvious trail to a leadership that prized ceremony over speed. Each success bought trust. Each trust bought a craftsman, a cartwright who could mend wagons in a night, a disgraced scribe who could compose a proclamation that sounded like law. Aldrich practiced the art of appearing inevitable. He looked less like a rebel and more like a correction, a man who said plainly, If you were taken in by them, you have a right to be made whole. The courts responded not with reasoned debate, but with something older and meaner: stories. Berengar, the lord who had signed the hearings that sent Aldrich away, called him a brigand in letters and offered rewards in coin and titles to any captain who could bring him dead. Yet the same letters revealed panic. Merchants paused their routes. Small garrisons sent word westward about a rag leading men whose ferocity had the odd effect of making seasoned mercenary captains refuse pay and title for the chance to stand beneath Aldrich's spear. Nobles talked in candlelit halls about the contagion of shame, as if morality could be quarantined. Then came the skirmish at Reedford Bridge. Not a pitched battle, but a thin thread of terror that would be stitched into tavern talk for years. Berengar dispatched a company of cavalry to clear the fords. They were veterans, paid well enough to hold discipline. Aldrich sent his men in the dark, striking the rear guard, collapsing the bridge planking with rope and poles. The cavalry, not used to fighting in muck and flares of panic, found themselves stuck, horses trapped, ranks disordered. When dawn revealed the white rag on the shattered spear above the marsh, something in the riders' will broke. They cut their losses and retreated, leaving behind a captain who had always wanted only to be heard. The victory did not make him whole. It made him consequential. Where before he had been a cautionary tale for commanders, he had become a problem the crown could no longer ignore. Messages changed tone. Subtle threats became thinly veiled offers of pardon if he would simply disband. Aldrich's men, now hardened and disciplined in their own rough way, were not interested in pardon. They wanted the ledger redressed. In the wake of Reedford, one of Berengar's supply wagons fell into Aldrich's hands. Inside, amid salted meat and a sealed purse, was a scrap of silk that should have meant nothing, a sash embroidered with the personal knot of the marshal who had abandoned the flank. Aldrich slit the hem with a dagger and found, folded in the lining, a list of names and sums, payments hidden in the pockets of policy. His own name sat there, beside a short note in the Chancellor's hand. Make him fallible, remove as needed. The ink was not merely an accusation. It was an instruction from the very institutions that preached honor. If earlier betrayals had been private shame, this discovery made the treason public and systemic. Aldrich pressed the paper to his chest and felt the weight of more than a personal vendetta. He had lit a match to a thatch roof of corruption. The question that hung over his men now was no longer who had left him for dead, but how far the rot reached, and whether the man who intended to hang his name in the dust had only been a single actor or a single instrument. When he folded the silk and tied it to the rag, it looked like a trinket, but Aldrich had learned the dangerous arithmetic of symbols. A sown lie, when exposed, multiplies. He raised the banner higher, and somewhere in a well-heated hall, a hand that had signed the order to abandon a flank read the name on the list and smiled in a way that meant the coming storm would not be simple retribution. The rag on the spear became a promise that could be repaid in more than plunder. Where Aldrich's men had once taken what they needed and melted away, they now held councils beneath hedgerows and in ruined barns. A butcher relieved a village's hungered elders of the tax on salt. A miller, whose family had been driven to pawn, received back his stones. These were small economies of justice, the sort that do not fit well on a royal ledger, but that make people remember names. Men began to travel to Aldrich, not simply for coin, but for remedy. A woman with a child arrived carrying a petition scrawled with trembling ink. It was not the law that moved them, but the sight of that rag, blackened and stubborn, and the belief that someone would answer. Such momentum asks to be negotiated. The crown sent a delegation, soft-voiced men with the smell of wax on their gloves and the certainty of parchment. They spoke of amnesty and order, of how brigandry could be folded into the service of the realm. Berengar, wounded in pride if not in body, offered Aldrich a formal pardon and a post as a marcher captain. Keep the peace in the borderlands, and all past grievances would be closed. The offer came wrapped in flattery and a paper that could be read two ways. In one light, it was clemency; in another, containment. This was the moment the theory of rebellion meets the cruelty of necessity. Not all of Aldrich's followers wanted the banner to be legitimized. Rowan, once a river ferryman whose hands had been calloused by oars and unpaid wages, argued openly that to take a crown's commission would turn them into instruments of the same ledger. He had watched his brother carried off by tax collectors at dusk and wanted something purer than a title. Others, whose families had tasted bread for the first time in months, urged caution. Hunger sharpens judgment. Fear dulls it. Aldrich listened to both and understood that leadership is the slow work of making impossible compromises. He chose to press the crown, not to beg, but to force a reckoning. With his rag tied beside the silk sash he had found in the supply wagon, Aldrich walked his men into the market square, where merchants traded in olives and wool, where children threw sticks, and where lords also came, because the market was where the state met its people. He unrolled the silk and read aloud the list folded in its hem. Names, sums, signatures. Each name landed like a flint. A constable moved to seize the paper. Aldrich's men formed a ring. The city held its breath. What followed was less a pitched battle than the slow unpeeling of pretense. Citizens demanded explanation. Guildsmen closed their shutters. A grease-stained cooper spat that if the law would not hold them, they would. Berengar's men, ordered to keep the peace, found their authority questioned by the very populace they were meant to protect. In a hall above the square, the chancellor who had written, "Make him fallible," wore the face of polite astonishment as his scandal spilled under the noon sun. He had not expected the rag to bring people to his door. Then came the bargain he himself had designed. The chancellor stepped forward and spoke in a voice meant to soothe thunder. The crown would open investigations, replace corrupt stewards, and bestow lands to those who aided the crown's efforts to restore order, provided Aldrich agreed to disband his levies and accept a commission under the crown's banner. He framed it as justice sealed into law. Some in the crowd cheered at the prospect of order returned. Rowan spat again and accused the chancellor of offering chains in silken rope. Aldrich felt the old ache of betrayal, not raw as before, but tempered into the cold of calculation. He had dreamed of burning ledgers and hanging traitors by any honest tree. He had also seen children starve on the road home. To refuse could mean a long war of attrition that would eat his men and raze the villages he sought to protect. To accept would mean his symbol lived inside the halls that had once dismissed him. The choice was not heroic, it was arithmetic of human lives. he took the commission. In the weeks that followed, the rag was stitched to a new staff, its ragged edge mended with black thread, and the marshal's knot, taken from the sash, carefully worked into the weave. Men who had cheered him in marsh and lane now wore badges of office and rode under his name. With his seal, Aldrich freed several prisoners and annulled certain unjust tolls. He reinstated the miller's stones and put the butcher's tax money to building a granary. For a time, his decisions saved lives and calmed the countryside. But systems have a way of remembering how to be themselves. The Chancellor, clever, networked, kept his ledger. Names shifted, payments were rerouted through different hands, and small legalistic paragraphs appeared in sealed scrolls that preserved the power of those who had once hidden behind secrecy. The silk list that had burned like a torch in the market was copied into files that no longer named the guilty, but named administrative procedures. One night, as Aldrich examined a charter meant to abolish a hated toll, he noticed a marginal note in a scribe's hand, to be reviewed with Marshal's consent. His consent now had to be given for the ledger to change its entries. The final twist came not with a battle, but with a banquet. Aldrich sat in a hall with polished beams and wax light reflecting off pewter plates. He watched men who had once spit his name now compliment his prudence. He watched his rag, newly cleaned and rebound, hang near the dais. Then a page brought him a sealed note. The silk sash, the original document in his hands months ago, had been taken from the archive, removed by order of the Chancellor for safekeeping. The names, the sums, the instruction, gone. Aldrich folded the paper and felt the weight of a victory he had not quite imagined. He had won a place at the table and the power to do good. He had also ceded a kind of freedom. He had raised a banner that made armies run, and he had watched it become part of the very pageant it had once opposed. In saving lives, he had softened a rage that might have burned the rot from the coffers. In keeping order, he had left the ledger itself intact enough to be used again. Courage can uproot injustice, but power bends even the most honest intents. Vigilance is the cost of reform. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to our channel for more true, fierce histories, because the past keeps teaching the present.